Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Code Sandwich Hour, the show where we talk code and sandwiches, and it takes about an hour. I'm your host, Sean C. Davis, and I am delighted to be here today for an extra special episode where we close out season 1 of this show. Now, you may or may not know that there's a community and organization behind the show called Certified Fresh Events. And this community just hit this major milestone, which is it has been operating for 5 years. And if you've been around the space long enough, you know that is no minor feat. That to have the drive, the consistency, the motivation, all of these attributes that you need to continue to put out content, to organize events. It takes a ton of effort. And so this was a major milestone. And so we're going to dedicate this whole episode in kind of a more unstructured format to simply celebrating that fact. And we'll talk about CFE. We'll get into some tech topics, and we'll, of course, cover a few of what have become kind of staple Code Sandwich Hour questions along the way. And so to help me celebrate, Brian Rinaldi, the founder, the creator, the man behind the scenes a lot of the time of CFE, is going to come on stage and help me celebrate. And so with that, let me welcome Brian to the stage. Thanks for being here, Brian.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be here on my own site.
That's right. Yes. Well, I'm you can probably tell, excited for this episode, because I think that a lot of people don't realize that you're behind the scenes, you're helping coordinate a lot of this show. And so it's great to have you on the other side of the camera. But also, I really like, as we've kind of figured out exactly what the show is, we've changed the format up, and today, totally different format. I usually have this like plethora of notes. I'm doing all this research on the guest and figuring out exactly how to move the show. And today we're just gonna celebrate. So this will be a lot of fun. And I think there are still a few of those those staple questions that I have to put you on the hot seat throughout, because it's in true format. So with that, I think the only way to really kick off this show is to ask you, what is the best sandwich?
Oh God. I mean, I love sandwiches as well. Maybe not as much as you. I don't know anybody loves sandwiches more than me until I started chatting with you. So mostly because there's a lot to love in a sandwich, but it's the bread. The bread makes the sandwich 100%. And I love bread. It's my nemesis. I could go without sweets, but without bread, it's just, anyway. I'm going to say my favorite sandwich is it's actually pretty simple. I love a good roast beef sandwich. I like the roast beef. I mean, normally, like if I eat my meat, I'm usually like I like stuff a little well done, but like when it's roast beef, like cold cuts, I like it nice and rare. Maybe some lettuce, definitely the horseradish mayo. So gotta, and I guess you can, if you really want to make it perfect, put it between 2 slices of sourdough. Maybe with a little Swiss.
Okay.
All right. Now I'm hungry. All right, I
gotta go. Okay, so it's an interesting answer, because it's a sandwich that doesn't really have a name aside from roast beef sandwich, where some of them
it's what's inside. Yeah, exactly.
It's what's inside. Okay, so all right, I was going to ask you about the bread. Sourdough is great. I've gotten into baking sourdough even actually before everybody got into baking sourdough, when the pandemic started. But you have to appreciate like a fresh slice of sourdough. It's hard to beat on a sandwich like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And my wife laughs at me because she says, like, when I would make sandwiches and stuff, I have like rules. Like I'm like, no, that doesn't go with mustard. That goes with mayo. Like that, you don't have roast beef with mustard. You have roast beef with mayo. Better horseradish mayo, but like, I like that little spiciness to it. So But then there's other sandwiches. I'm like, no, you don't have that with mayo. You have to have that with mustard. So
Okay, well, I totally get that, and I'm thinking, I don't do roast beef very much, but and this is not traditionally a great sandwich, but Arby's is known for that roast beef sandwich, and I don't know that I've really ever put either horseradish by itself or the horseradish mustard, spread
mayo.
condiment with or mayo, yes, on a sandwich other than at Arby's. And so I'm like, oh yes, when when you say when you're pairing roast beef with horseradish mayo, I'm like, oh yes, it makes sense. But also I think of Arby's.
Don't ruin my sandwich, damn it. Yeah.
Uh,
Once upon a time, when I was in college, I actually worked at a sandwich shop. It was deli style, like where you came in and I worked a slicer. Like I'm sitting there, you'd order what you want. I'd pull out the cold cuts and slice them right onto your sandwich. Um, yeah. And oh my God, yeah, I had so many good sandwiches. I had my choice of the other thing I loved was pastrami. Oh God, I love a good
oh
pastrami
yes,
with Swiss.
I love
Oh,
pastrami.
all right. Yeah. Yeah. But we could go on.
Okay, we could. The last thing I'll say, okay, so it's also a chain, but when you put all the sandwich chains, at least that are available to me in the Cincinnati area, when I compare them all, the one that stands above all the rest for me is a place called Jersey Mike's, and I think a big part of the reason for that is that they're slicing the meat on site right before they put it on the sandwich. It's so much fresher than all the other chain sandwiches that I have.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely gives it a different there's a difference in the flavor in the end. I think that you don't think there would be. You're like, well, what happens to cocoa? But like,
Yeah.
particularly with things like roast beef and stuff like that, they're like roast beef sitting out there already starts to lose its color and its flavor. Um, you know, it, Roast beef is like delicate, especially when it's sliced. So it doesn't last. Like,
Mhm,
on the other hand,
mhm,
you could have
mhm.
salami out there forever, and it'd be like, yeah, it's salami, salami. It doesn't really, you know,
True,
it,
true.
yeah, it
Yes.
doesn't. The flavor doesn't really change, but like certain meats, your roast beefs, your chickens, your turkey, if you like that, um, you know, freshly sliced makes a difference.
Yeah,
Or the
makes sense.
pastrami.
Makes sense. Or pastrami. Yes. Okay. So you're right. We could talk about this forever. Let's yeah, so we're here to celebrate 5 years of certified fresh events, which is
I
amazing.
know. Can you believe it?
Um I can't, and I was even trying to think earlier today, like when was the first time I had heard about it or the first event I joined? And it was, I don't know, it was probably 2019, 2020. So somewhere in the middle there, I think. But because of that, I haven't really thought much or know much at all really about the early days. So I thought that would be an interesting place to start. Like, could you tell us the story of the motivation and the genesis of this thing?
Sure. Yeah. So it started. I didn't obviously have CFE.dev because we didn't have like I think 5 years ago there wasn't really a .dev domain name, so it
Oh,
was
interesting. Okay.
under certifiedfreshevents.com, and the original idea was it's going to be a place for because you know over the course of my career, even before I got into DevRel, I was running conferences, right? And I think my first conference was over 15 years ago. It was about Flash and Flex, so you can kind
Amazing.
of gauge. Yeah. um, so I would run a lot of events both in and out of work. And about 5 years ago, I was like, I had moved to Orlando 6 years ago, and I wanted to start running events in Orlando, and I wanted like an umbrella to run the events under. Um, so was going to start this up, and the original idea was, well, until I get ready to run like the in-person events, I'm going to just run some virtual events, right? At the
Okay.
time, 5 years ago, like virtual events, well, I mean, people still complain about them, but I mean, back then it was like, this is dumb. Like, who runs virtual events? Like, places wouldn't even list them. I'd send them to people, and they like, sorry, we only list real events. Like, in-person
Only
event. So I
real
was like,
events.
okay.
And so context, this is 2017, is that right?
Yeah, 2017.
Okay.
So, but actually, I managed to get the the first one I ran got included into JavaScript Weekly. So it's still one of the biggest audiences I had
Oh,
live,
interesting.
funny enough, in the 5 years of running this. Because I think we had for that first one, we had 270 people live, live attendees,
Wow. Just for
which
like a
for
small,
for
what
a
was
one
a small
hour,
meetup?
1 hour meetup thing. Yeah. And so, um, yeah. So anyway, it's so I was like, oh well, I'll just run these virtual events until I get around to running the in-person events, right? And then I'll have a mailing list I can use for in-person events. And I did end up running one in-person event a couple years later, but it obviously has transitioned to being completely virtual events. Even back then, that was the only real event I ever ran under the name, under the business name. But everything else has been virtual. And I was a skeptic of virtual when I started doing it. I was like,
Yeah.
I'll do it, but I'm not sure I believe in it. And then the more I started doing it, the more I really found it has certain benefits. There are drawbacks, obviously, but there are a ton of benefits to running virtual events. One being it's accessible to anyone around the world, and I can run them for
Mhm.
free. And the costs are low. They're not nothing, but they're low. So um,
When
anyway.
so when COVID hit, did you feel, were you like, I'm so far ahead of my time? Everyone's like, oh yeah, we can do virtual events. This is fine. You're like, man, I've been doing it for 3 years.
Yeah, it's funny because COVID hit, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a great opportunity, of which I probably, arguably, it was a good opportunity, but I don't know that I fully took advantage of it. Our audience did grow dramatically, for the beginning of COVID. The
Mhm.
meetups were having a lot more attendance and stuff like that. Um, so I feel like we were ahead of the game. We being, the site, me, kind of royal we, I guess, was a little bit ahead of the game running a lot of virtual events, um, but it turned out to be weird because you got that initial boost, but then everybody started running virtual events, and so
Yeah.
now
Yep.
we're at a place where it's tough for people because there's so many different options for them to go to, and they're a bit burnt out on it, after a couple years of COVID virtual events. And I think it's I think we're in the midst of figuring out exactly where virtual events fit into the whole
Mhm.
developer event landscape. I think there's definitely room to have virtual events and in-person events. I don't think it's okay, now that we're having in-person events, virtual events don't have a lot of value anymore. I think that's totally not true. They're easily accessible. You can have a lot of interactivity with the audience depending on how you run them. They're cheap. They're um,
Mhm.
so I can get speakers from around the world. I get my pick of speakers, and I've had some really great speakers because of that. There's tons of benefits to doing it. Um, the drawback is number one, that now there's so many. Um, so it only adds to the distractions there was already a lot of distractions when you're in a virtual event. And now it's okay, I could go to that virtual event or these other 10 virtual events, all running at the
Mhm.
same time. So yeah.
But so there's probably, I mean, COVID clearly changed everything, and we know, like, I think what you're saying is right, that we're already seeing in-person events coming back. We're also seeing some people found some footing in virtual events that they'll keep going. But do you anticipate that the future of CFE remains virtual, and do you think there comes a time, do you think there are some virtual events that there weren't previously that are going to stick around, or do you see like a slowly moving back to in person, and you'll kind of stay in this niche here that you can be like the virtual expert, so to speak?
I wish I had a definitive answer to that question. It's something I toy with on and off all the time, which is, I think, uh, as far as what I want to do, right now I'm sticking with virtual events. Partly, I'll tell you my reasoning is be, I'd say be sensitive to people who are running in person, any events right now, but in person events are brutally tough. They were always difficult. They were high stress. You often didn't know until like late whether it was going to be a complete bomb or a huge success because people wait till the last minute to buy their tickets. And this is like even 5 years
Mhm.
ago, 10 years ago. The last minute has gotten closer and closer to the event as time has gone on, to where you often don't know like until very very last minute, and there's nothing you can do. Um, the costs are high. You have to put a lot of money down to run an in-person event. Um, most of that's food, but then you also have travel expenses and all kind. And anyway, there's a lot of upfront costs, and so the difference between success and failure on an in-person event is often like us maybe one or two sponsors or 10% 20% of your attendance. Like if it drops 10% 20%, you might end up going from like making a decent amount of money on it to losing a bunch of money. And so COVID, like we are back to in-person events, but I can tell you that almost across the board, every person I talk to who's running in-person events, they're down like 40% on
Wow.
attendance
Okay.
from what they were pre-COVID. So it's it's still tough. And then they're dealing with speakers can't make it because their travel got screwed up because there's travel's a mess right now, and the outbreak of COVID at the conference, and I mean it's super complicated right now. If running events, like I said, was always complicated, but it's brutally complicated now. And then add in the economy taking
Mhm.
sort of a downturn, and suddenly like sponsors are disappearing, and companies like I can't pay for the tickets, and yeah, you know, s-
Yeah,
I need
it's a
my
full
sleep. I need my sleep,
No,
and if I run this, I'm like right now, if I ran an in-person event, I would not sleep. For
no, and
so
and you're doing it on the side, and for a lot of the bigger ones, I mean, I think people don't realize that it's several people's full-time job for a little while to plan those
yeah,
things.
oh
But
yeah, yeah.
so we take an event like More Serverless, which just happened just a week
Last week.
ago.
Hmm.
Um, And so that's one of your bigger events where it's a 1 day conference. People who attend it, they get to see you on screen playing MC and all of that. But I think a lot of people don't really know what happens behind the scenes. Like how early do you start thinking about more serverless? How what are you what do you have to do in terms of coordinating the funding it and you're setting, offsetting your costs, being that it's a side project, and making sure you're getting speakers so that you're powerful speakers so that you can also get attendance.
Yeah.
What's everything that's going on?
So for a virtual event, you have a little bit more flexibility, like to planning, because you don't have to physical like location and all that stuff to scope out. So for like more serverless or jam.dev, it's usually like, I mean, we probably jam.dev is usually in January, and we'll probably start planning it if we're going to do it virtual or not. I haven't decided yet. Um, we'll should be planning it right about now. So you're talking about like 5 6 months ahead of time.
Okay.
And then a lot of that's more like just kind of getting the basic logistics set up. Like, okay, pick a date, so that because if you don't have a date, and some basic information like set, you can't go start finding potential sponsors or potential speakers. So you need to have kind of that information set. And typically, I mean, not to give like too much um, behind the curtain stuff, but typically, because I partner with another place that does a lot of like, I mean, for the bigger conferences, I want super high quality production value because sponsors are paying for that. So I partner with FITC to do that stuff, and in order to do that, we have more costs than say like running my meetups, which is like just me, um, and some of the infrastructure that you have to pay for. But like I would start looking for sponsors to make sure we can actually not lose our shirt on it kind of thing, because we have to pay contractors, the guy who runs the video, and the people behind the scenes who are helping with chat and doing support. And I mean there's you know like even more serverless, there's technically I think 4 or 5 of us in total involved in that,
Okay.
behind the scenes, doing various pieces, speaker management, sponsors, all this. So there's more costs involved. So you have to kind of make sure you have the cost covered before you jump in. At least that's how I like to do it. Um, anyway, so I'd start doing that right now, like seeing if I feeling out some initial sponsors, and then also maybe feeling out some like kind of keynote speakers, so that because that the two kind of work in sync. You want to, having the big name speaker helps you land the
Mhm.
big name sponsors, and anyway. Because
Yeah.
then they're sure, like, so okay, so this is gonna be a successful event because so and so is gonna be speaking there, and they're well known and whatever, draw an audience.
Yeah, yeah, and I just think it's really it's fascinating that you just don't see so much of that when you're experiencing the conference, that it's you're right, a lot less work I think than something that's in person, but still a lot
Yeah,
that goes on behind the scenes. Something
yeah.
that I was interested in that I think just to like, but we talk a lot in this show about the passage of time in terms of folks' careers and all of that and what they've been thinking about. And so, we're talking about this history of virtual events and meetups and all of that, like it's been a constant. But I'm thinking something that's probably changed is like generally the content. I mean, you've by hosting something every other week for 5 years, that you get to see this flow in trends um, pretty readily. And so 20 and well, maybe you can just give us like a quick overview. Like what were the hot topics in 2017, and what do you feel like this show has given you in terms of insights into the industry by having to keep hosting events?
I think the first one was a JavaScript one. It was Raymond Camden and TJ Van Tol did like,
Okay.
JavaScript in 2017, and ES6 was still relatively new.
Yeah.
We
It's
were,
early Gatsby days probably, right?
yeah. So like, so yeah, React was relatively new. I mean, like a lot has changed in a short time since 2017. Um, but so I come from a JavaScript front end the kind of background, at least my more like the past decade or so of my career, and so like most of my connections were in those areas, and so I
Mhm.
tend to
Okay.
kind of focus on front end, but we did do a lot of IoT stuff, and we were talking Go. So I mean, on a high level, the topics are all kind of the same. I think the specifics of what people were talking about is different. Definitely the web development stuff has changed a lot. I guess, well, was Jamstack even officially thing? Yes, I think it was,
It
because
was
there's
like
been,
I would say technically they say Netlify was founded and Jamstack coined somewhere in the 2015, 2016
yeah.
timeframe, but and I don't feel like I was in a Ruby on Rails shop at that time, and I switched to the shop I was at switched to going all in on the Jamstack pattern. We used Netlify, we switched to Gatsby and headless CMS, and that was all happening for me. I think it was like the second half of 2017.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it was definitely big changes right around there for Jamstack stuff. I think a lot of the tools that
Mhm.
we're using today, like like Next.js or definitely stuff like Astro or what. I mean, these. I don't even think Next.js was around yet, or maybe it was in
I
its
don't know. When you look
infancy.
up, I've written so many history posts that like I've got. I'll screw them up every once in a while, but it's always surprising me to look it up and see that the first official release of Next, it goes back to like 2015 or 2016, but that in the first Jamstack conference was October of 2018, and we weren't. It was like there were probably people using Next, but it was that I recall that I went to that one, and I recall that was all Gatsby. That was even like, man, I'm still, there's so much to learn still about Gatsby. That was the cool kid, and now it's like nobody wants to touch Gatsby, right? I'm sure that's not true.
You're gonna get us in trouble, aren't you, Sean?
I know, no. It's still it's got its benefits for sure.
It's yeah. I mean, I think there's just so many new tools. It's like that's the fun thing. I get to kind of, especially because I pick the speakers, and it's like, hey, I want to learn about. The reason this all started, even like why I started doing events, is like I love to learn about new stuff, and often I love to learn about things that like have nothing really to do with my what I'm going to do professionally. Like I am focused on, like I said, on front end, on
Mhm.
JavaScript, and on serverless and Jamstack. But like I wanted to learn IoT stuff, even though I like honestly I've never built anything IoT. Or I was like, Go seems really cool, and I went, so I'd like started doing Go, and I pick topics based on like things I want to learn about in a way. Um, following some trends, like obviously I try to pick things people are interested in, but I definitely want to learn about it. And I've had people even tell me like, "Oh, you could be like way more successful with this site if you just um, focused on one thing. Like, say we're all about front end, or we're all about Jamstack, or whatever." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I mean that's cool, but that's not what I'm into. Like, I want to learn about all kinds of other stuff. That's fun to me. Like, even if I never touch like that language or that tool, I want to learn about it. Um, so so yeah, it's that's the fun thing for me. Like it's just sharing that kind of that opportunity to learn about new things, and just constantly learning about them from like the experts, right? Like I get the people I've
Mhm.
been
Mhm.
fortunate enough to have on are like, you know, um, are people well known in the field for like being experts in the topics they're talking about. So it's like, I mean, who could beat that? I get to sit there and learn stuff, learn a new thing every couple of weeks, like from somebody who's like super expert in this, like a super expert in this topic. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a really interesting outlet because for me, I like my side project is generally more blogging and writing, and so if I'm going to do that, I'm researching and exploring first. It's like this is you get kind of a quick snapshot in an hour, and so on that note, do you um, has there been can you recall a talk where you like regardless of your motivation for scheduling it, but that it was something you didn't really know about and that you actually then either spun up a side project or dug into more because the talk was so interesting?
Oh God, I'm sure. Putting me on the spot, I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
I haven't done that much. That's
you know, like I mean, I know um, recently being like late last year, we had Cassidy Williams on, and she was doing into Astro. And it was definitely
oh yeah,
something
yeah,
that
yeah.
like
Right.
was on my list of I want to mess with that. But I hadn't really had the time to learn it. And then I sat through that, and I'm like, okay, I'm definitely gonna do that. So I mean, I'd say it tends to still fall within like the stuff I have the time to really dig into
Mhm. Yeah.
professionally tend to be the things that you know fall into the areas that I know. So like we also had talk about SvelteKit, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to try that too, um, and and stuff like that. I love learning about like the next one is all about DevOps stuff that I mean, Launch Darkly where I work is like kind of in the DevOps space, but I'm not a DevOpsy person per se. And as much as any developer is not DevOps anymore, like we're all kind of managing some of the infrastructure on some level and managing the
Sure.
continuous
Yep.
deployment, whatever. But I'm not like that's not really my focus area. But I'm actually really curious to learn more about that because I think it's a topic I really should know more about, and like can't wait to learn more about it from her.
Well, so it's great. You kind of get this you get this taste, like you can speak, to
Yeah,
some degree of knowledge about so many different topics, and you don't have to put a ton of effort
yeah.
into the research. It gets kind of fed to you, which
I
is
get people to tell me.
that's right.
But
That's
yeah, I used to describe it like I always said, even before I started this, I'm like, I feel like so in Boston there's this really, really big splash pool called that's in Boston Common called a frog pond. And I used to kind of say like that I was like the frog pond. I covered a wide area, but I'm not very deep at any particular point, you know.
yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I that idea really resonates with me where I think about always thinking about like what's the next step of the website and the blog and all of that or YouTube channel. And I know because I read the DevRels and the influencers who are the celebrities in our space. It's like, well, everybody's got their thing, and so you need two things. You need, well, maybe three things. You need your thing. You need to have some presence that's really engaging, and you need to do it constantly. And so you need like this intersection of all of those things. And I'm kind of like you where I I'm so interested in developments of things that are happening and things I don't understand. And I also just want to share the information that I have. And that's not one particular area or anything like that. So I prefer to write about all of these different things. So that idea resonates with me. And I know it's not like the formula for success, but I also think that one, you can kind of, by being wide and shallow, you can potentially attract folks who maybe something catches their attention, and then they're talking with people they wouldn't otherwise um, communicate with. But it also made me think, is there a yeah, okay, so getting to a question, the question it just popped in my head was, do you think there's a space where you could actually brand yourself as having a thing, and the thing is you come here because you're filling in the gaps of the ecosystem today? Like, can you push your ideology of what a side project is on other people to entice them to come to things that might not otherwise interest them or catch their attention?
um, you know, I think you could. I kind of figure as far as this, like any kind of, especially when you're talking a side project, whether it's your blog or a site like this or whatever. I mean, the only way to keep it alive is that you gotta love doing it. So, and
Hmm.
you hope that whatever you're doing, even if it's not a huge audience, there's other people out there that you're helping who have similar kind of interests and to you, and so I think for number one, you can't look completely for external validation. Which I mean, a side project lives partly because you enjoy doing it, and even running this for 5 years has taught me that if you're looking for that external validation, it ebbs and flows, and so it's hard to keep your motivation going if you're relying on that when it ebbs,
No.
right? And so like it won't, because it's not always going to be constant. So you got to do something you love doing, that you're passionate about doing. And in my case, it happens to be like I love running events. I love being in the developer community. I love kind of meeting new people, and all that kind of fits nicely into this. So even even if I have an event that doesn't have like that massive audience that I would like on, there's a part of me that would love to have like the biggest audience possible at every possible, but I get to meet a new person, I get to learn new things,
Mhm.
and so like, it's not just about me. Obviously, I want to share that with whoever want, that's the whole point of this, but if I can't, you know, if I'm not enjoying it, then the project will eventually, you know, and the same thing goes with a blog, which is probably my blog is kind of, speaking of blogs, my blog is kind of dead because a lot of my energy is put here, right? So,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
um, but your blog is like you got to enjoy, find things you enjoy writing about, and I mean, people come. Hopefully, people come. They probably will. There's definitely people out there who have similar interests to you, whatever your interests are. So just kind of take your lead from that, right?
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to, for speaking again of side projects, you don't necessarily have to have a cult following to be successful. Like my site is probably I don't know that I could actually verify this, but I would guess less than 1% people coming to look for new content, and it is at least 99% Google traffic, because I'm mostly writing about maybe it might be skewed a little bit. I'm mostly writing about solutions to problems, but I'll put some ideas in there and get some chatter on Twitter. But yeah, it's I agree. It's like if I do it because I like writing, not because I'm trying to get
Hmm.
in page views and monetize. If I actually want, it's like, and maybe what we're getting at here, and maybe a good way to wrap this and transition is to say like there's I don't know, some inherent difference of having a side project because it's a hobby, it's an interest, it's a thing that you enjoy, versus you are doing this because you want to turn it into a business. And not that those two things can't overlap, but they have different motivations and different side effects,
Yeah.
I think, result. Do you think so?
Yeah. I mean, if you're trying to turn it into a business, I'm the wrong person because I've always managed to get these things to a certain point. Like I've had multiple things that I've kind of spun off, and then, you know, um, sometimes in the past I sold them. But you know, I've never been one to really figure out how to make a lot of money off of any of my side things. So, not even this. I make enough to like hopefully one day pay myself back for all the money I spent on it. Um, you know, which will take a while at the current rate. But
That's all right. It's fun, right?
yeah, it is fun. Like that's what I said. Like otherwise, it would be dead. If it wasn't fun, it would be dead. So, this is anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a perfect transition to work toward closing the season out. And usually I do this kind of what has become a longer series of hot seat questions, but I thought we'd end up with two that I asked in the first episode and wasn't sure if they would hang around, but they really kind of got some attention and some interesting answers. So I figured let's end with those, and then we'll close out the season. And kind of a great segue, I think, from talking about CFE and side projects and all of this is what would you say is the worst mistake that you've made in your experience here running CFE over the last 5 years?
I think the worst mistake I made was actually that. I mean, it was a mistake in terms of if you talk about like I lost a lot of money on it, and things like that. It was still it went like for the people who came, it went really well and stuff. But I ran that in-person conference and here in Orlando, um, and I think, I mean, I had, as with any failed event, you have a number of things you think were the reason. It happened to come right before we closed up for COVID. So I think that
Mm.
really hurt the number of attendees. It's it also was maybe too nichey of a topic. The kind of hook was that it was all about like being a developer, but the talks all had ties into um, history, like the history of the web, right? Like It was all web development stuff, but it's like very tied into like I teach you about some new topic, but with a lot of the history of it. Um, so it's called like a flashback conference.
Which
And
is super interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I thought it'd be cool. I thought, but anyway, who knows if it was the niche topic or if it was the fact that like it was COVID. I mean, I think, or some combination of all those things.
Yep.
But that was the only event I've ever run where I really lost a bunch of money.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
bunch being, I didn't, like in the high thousands, like I think it was like 8K on that thing. So it's not like the end of the world, but still a lot of money.
But yeah, that's significant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Enough to make you not want to do in-person events again for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None. I haven't done any since then yet. I mean, like that was a low cost event. So in terms of like, it was designed to be not like I wasn't doing a big conference center or anything like that. That's where like you get into like these, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollar contracts that are hard to get out of, and where you can really, really get killed. But thankfully, the people running them know what the hell they're doing for the most part.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then very last question is I'm going to go back to the classic four-parter, which is the scenario is you get to have a meal, generally lunch, with anybody, living or dead, and so you have to answer who's the person, where are you going, and what are you eating, and or what are you ordering, and what topic are you discussing with them?
Okay, so I knew you were going to ask this because obviously I've watched every episode. So and I gave a lot of thought to it, and I think in the end I was trying to come up with like I caught myself trying to come up with too smart of an answer when in fact like I don't really have like the smartest answer. It's just I went with a gut feeling, and it's going to be super kind of nerdy and boring. But I want to have lunch with Mark Hamill, and
Okay.
not because I'm a giant Star Wars nerd, because I love Star Wars, but like, but he's had like a really interesting career in the sense like it was defined by Star Wars, obviously. But he's been the voice of Joker in just about everything, which I love. He does a great job as the Joker. I mean, he's really like his voice now defines the Joker. And if you don't know it's him, like if you don't know he's the person who does the Joker, you'd have no idea.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because it doesn't sound anything like him. He's just done a lot of interesting things post career, and especially now, he's like super politically active. I love he's great on Twitter. He's like funny and charismatic, and just I don't know. I just want to know. I'd love to have lunch and just ask him about his career and kind of things you do on this show. I'd love to have this kind of conversation with him. And then we would go. So I'd take him. I mean, assuming he's in Orlando, we'd go to Stasio's Deli and get sandwiches.
All right. Yeah. Roast beef sandwich.
Roast beef sandwiches, exactly. So, and what was okay, it was who, where, and what was the other part? What would we talk about? I think, we covered talk about, like his career, basically. I'd like to ask him about that, and, yeah, that's
I love
really
that.
it.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me. This is great. It was really interesting to hear about the history of certified fresh events, and I think a great way to close out season 1. I'm really looking forward to you taking a little break, and you and I are going to spend some time brainstorming about how we can make this thing bigger, better, more creative next year, or not next year, next season, which will hopefully we're planning on starting sometime in the fall 2022 here. And for those of you listening, you can catch all of the first season of Code Sandwich Hour in video format on YouTube, and also you can get to the YouTube videos through CFE.dev, and you can get the audio format in podcast form wherever you happen to get your podcasts. With that, I think that about wraps up. Definitely check out CFE.dev in the interim while we're on our break. Catch the meetups that happen twice a month, and keep a word out. Join the Discord community. Follow us on Twitter. What else?
And the massive library of this 5 years worth of meetups are all there for free.
Do you have?
I think we're nearing 200 now. 200 videos. And every single one of them is free. So it's the one thing I complain about all the time. There's so much stuff there. Then people just I need to do a better job of getting it out there. But yeah, it's just a great resource for people most people don't know about.
Yeah, and imagine they stay. We talked about the passage of time, but I imagine that you could probably still find some pretty relevant topics if you go back to some of those 2017 topics.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're not some of the stuff gets dated quickly, and others, they're still relevant 4 years later. So, and granted, we've been running it for 4 years, so there's 5 years. So there's stuff from last month, or stuff from 5 years ago. You just search the topic you want to find, and probably I have it. So.
Or send you a message and you'll make it happen.
Yeah. Or send me a message and say, hey, you haven't covered this topic. You really should. I've been looking for something on Python. We haven't done anything on Python in 5 years, which boggles my mind.
And I've been hearing, actually somehow been hearing more folks talk about it. So that'd be great. So actually, tell, so aside from CFE.dev and getting a link to joining Discord from there, how else can people get in touch with you or with the community?
Yeah, so you can see my name is @RemoteSynth on just about any service you're on, but I'm most active on Twitter, and my DMs are open, so I'm happy to have people reach out to me.
Fantastic. All right, thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for a great season 1. It was a lot of fun.
This was amazing. Thank you all the viewers and listeners out there. Go back to some of those previous episodes, and we'll see you next season.